In a quiet laboratory, a scientist stares at a report, his mind struggling to accept what the numbers are telling him. The subject is a collection of human teeth, unearthed from the deep, silent darkness of a collapsed cave. Anatomically, they are indistinguishable from your own. But the date that has returned from the uranium-thorium test is not 20,000 years, not even 100,000 years. The date is 420,000 years. In that single, sterile moment of discovery, the entire, carefully constructed timeline of human civilization does not simply bend. It shatters into a million unrecognizable pieces. Good evening. I am Mr. H, and it is in the silent spaces between such shattered pieces of history that we often find the most profound truths. The story of those impossible teeth, found in a place in modern-day Israel known as Qesem Cave, is only the first thread. It is the thread that, when pulled, begins to unravel not just a chapter, but the entire book of human origins, revealing a past far more ancient and far more advanced than we have ever dared to imagine. Our story begins not in the hallowed halls of a university or in the dusty archives of a museum, but on the raw, sun-beaten earth of the Levant. The year is 2000, and the modern state of Israel is in a period of growth and expansion. Along the path of the planned Highway 5, a major artery designed to connect the coast with the Central Plains, construction crews work under a familiar rhythm of deadlines and heavy machinery. Their task on this particular autumn day is a common one in this rocky landscape: to remove an obstacle. It is a massive outcrop of limestone, a silent, unmoving titan that stands directly in the path of progress. For the engineers and the road crew, the rock is not an object of wonder, but a problem to be solved. And the solution, as is often the case, is direct and brutal: dynamite. Holes are drilled, charges are set, and a perimeter is cleared. A signal is given, a button is pressed, and for a brief moment, the earth heaves. With a deafening roar, the ancient limestone is blasted into a cascade of rubble and dust. When the air finally clears, the workers move in to begin the task of clearing the debris. But as they begin their work, one of them stops. He calls over his team leader. Where the solid face of the rock once stood, there is now a wound, a dark and gaping hole leading down into the earth. It is an unexpected cavity, a pocket of darkness revealed by the sudden violence of the explosion. Curiosity overcomes the routine of the workday. Flashlights are retrieved, and a group of workers gathers at the edge of the newly formed abyss, peering into the blackness. The beams of their lights cut through the subterranean gloom, and what they see immediately silences them. This is not just a natural fissure in the rock. The scene below is one of strange and deliberate order. Along the floor of the cave, arranged in neat, almost formal rows, are countless tools carved from stone. Piles of animal bones, bleached white by the passage of immense time, are stacked with an apparent sense of purpose. The air is thick with the scent of ancient dust and the profound stillness of a place that has not been touched by sunlight or disturbed by living beings for an unimaginable span of time. The foreman, a man whose thoughts were moments before on schedules and concrete, now finds himself staring at a scene of profound historical significance, a scene that brings his multi-million-dollar project to a grinding, immediate halt. According to Israeli law, any construction site where artifacts of potential archaeological value are found must cease all activity at once. With a heavy heart for his project's delay, he makes the necessary call to the authorities. The news travels quickly through the academic corridors of Israel. Soon, a team of archaeologists from the esteemed Tel Aviv University arrives at the site. They are led by Professor Ran Bar-Kai, one of the nation's foremost experts on the prehistoric era. While the construction crew saw an expensive delay, Professor Bar-Kai sees the discovery of a lifetime. With an excitement he can barely contain, he approaches the cave entrance. Based on his vast experience, he can tell from the style of the stone tools alone that this site is ancient, likely dating back tens of thousands of years at the very least. He knows he is standing on the precipice of a major discovery. It is he who gives the site its official name, a name that would prove to be eerily prophetic. He calls it the Qesem Cave. In Hebrew, Qesem means magic, or prophecy. He could not have known then how deeply the secrets within this cave would challenge the established story of our own origins. The painstaking work of scientific excavation began in the year 2001. Professor Barkai and his team worked with the meticulous care of surgeons, mapping every square inch of the cave, documenting the precise location of every bone fragment and every stone tool. Their first priority was to establish a firm timeline. For a site of this potential age, the standard radiocarbon dating method, which is effective for objects up to around 50,000 years old, would not be sufficient. Instead, they would rely on a more advanced technique known as uranium-thorium dating. This method analyzes the radioactive decay of uranium isotopes in mineral formations, like the calcite layers that had slowly coated the artifacts in the cave. It is a geological clock, one that can accurately measure time stretching back as far as 450,000 years, with a remarkably small margin of error. Samples of the calcite crusts from the cave floor and from the artifacts themselves were carefully collected and sent to a specialized laboratory for analysis. The team waited, knowing the results would be the foundation upon which all subsequent discoveries would be built. When the report finally came back, it delivered the first of several profound shocks. The analysis was conclusive. The layers of the cave and the artifacts within them were dated to a period between 420,000 and 200,000 years ago. The oldest, lowest levels of human occupation were from 420,000 years in the past. Let us pause to comprehend the weight of that number. This was not a settlement from the dawn of agriculture 10,000 years ago. This was not a camp of early modern humans from 100,000 years ago. This was a site from the early to middle Paleolithic era, the Old Stone Age. According to the established scientific consensus, the dominant human species, or hominin, in this region of the world during that immense time span should have been Homo erectus, an archaic ancestor with a smaller brain and a far more primitive toolkit. The sophistication and organization hinted at by the neat rows of tools already seemed out of place for this era. The first crack in the bedrock of history had appeared, but the true earthquake was yet to come. As the excavation continued, the team made the most significant discovery of all. Buried within the layers of ancient earth, they found the remains of the people themselves. Not full skeletons, but something just as definitive. Teeth. A small collection of human teeth, preserved with incredible fidelity by the protective environment of the cave. Professor Barkai's first reaction was that of a disciplined scientist. He assumed these remains must be from a later, more recent period of occupation. It was a logical conclusion. Perhaps, he thought, the cave was used by Homo erectus 400,000 years ago, and then, much later, modern humans moved in, leaving their teeth behind in the upper layers. It was the only explanation that made sense within the existing framework of human history. To confirm this, another set of samples, including the precious teeth, were sent back to the laboratory for a new round of uranium-thorium dating. Once again, the team waited. The results of this test would either solve the puzzle or deepen the mystery beyond all expectation. When the second report arrived, it did not solve the puzzle. It obliterated it. The laboratory analysis was unequivocal. The teeth were not from a later period. They were the same age as the oldest layers of the cave. They were 400,000 years old. And then came the final, paradigm-shattering conclusion. After exhaustive morphological analysis, the anatomy of the teeth was found to be identical to that of modern humans, Homo sapiens, our species. The implications of this were, and still are, staggering. The universally accepted story of human origins, the out-of-Africa theory, posits that Homo sapiens evolved in Africa around 300,000 years ago. Furthermore, this theory states that our species remained on the African continent for the next 200,000 years, only beginning to migrate out into the rest of the world, into places like the Middle East, around 70 to 80,000 years ago. Yet, here in Qesem Cave, was direct physical evidence of modern humans living in Israel, a full 100,000 years before our species was even supposed to exist, and more than 300,000 years before we were supposed to have left Africa. It was a historical impossibility. The people of Qesem Cave should not have existed, but they did. And so, the team was forced to confront a new reality and a new set of questions. Who were these people? And if they were anatomically modern humans, did they behave like modern humans? The evidence they uncovered next painted a picture not of primitive, grunting cavemen, but of a culture of shocking sophistication. The sheer volume of animal bones belonged primarily to fallow deer, indicating that these were not opportunistic scavengers but highly skilled, organized hunters. They conducted large-scale hunts, targeting specific prey during specific seasons, which demonstrates a deep understanding of their environment and the ability for long-term planning. Their cave was not a chaotic den. It was a home with designated spaces for different activities. The butchering of animals was consistently done outside the main living area, with only the choicest cuts of meat being brought inside. This suggests a concept of hygiene and a structured approach to daily life. Even more astonishing was their knowledge of food preservation. They had a method for preserving bone marrow for long periods, essentially creating a type of prehistoric canned food by keeping the marrow inside the bone and sealed with skin. They also appeared to use beds of ash from their fires to dry meat, another advanced technique for ensuring a stable food supply through lean times. This was not the behavior of a species struggling for survival day to day. This was the behavior of a thriving, intelligent community planning for its future. This sophistication extended to their technology. The production of their stone tools was highly standardized. They were not simply striking rocks together randomly. They were following a set of established procedures to create specific tools for specific tasks, almost like a prehistoric assembly line. The consistency and quality of their blades, scrapers, and hand axes were remarkable. But among the thousands of functional tools, one stood out. It was a beautifully crafted hand axe, carved from the bone of an elephant, perfectly symmetrical and showing no signs of wear or use whatsoever. It was not a tool for butchering. It appeared to be a ritual object, something created for a higher purpose. This hint of a spiritual life led Professor Barkai to explore every hidden corner of the cave. In a secluded, elevated chamber, difficult to access, he found what he had been looking for. There, in the dim light, was what appeared to be an altar. Resting upon it and around it were more unique artifacts. Several more of the exquisite ivory axes and a collection of perfectly round, multifaceted stone balls, all of which seemed to be objects of ceremonial importance. This was the final, most profound piece of the puzzle. 400,000 years ago, in an era of supposed primitivism, here was a community of modern humans who not only hunted with strategy, planned for the future, and built an organized society, but who also looked to the heavens. They had a religion, they had a faith, they had a soul. In every way, they were us. This global revelation makes me wonder, where is this story finding you? And what time is it on your watch as we contemplate a common mystery together? Yet they exist in our history as ghosts, a paradox written in stone and bone, challenging the very first page of our story. If the discovery at Qesem Cave represents a crack in the foundation of human history, then our next destination is the earthquake that brings the entire structure crashing down. To truly understand its magnitude, we must first remind ourselves of the story we have all been told, the bedrock principle upon which the entire history of civilization was built. For more than a century, the consensus was clear, taught in every school, printed in every textbook. It was called the Neolithic Revolution. The story went like this. For hundreds of thousands of years, humanity existed as small nomadic bands of hunter-gatherers. Our ancestors were wanderers, their lives dictated by the seasons and the migration of animals. They lived in temporary shelters, their societies were simple and egalitarian, and their minds were occupied entirely with the immediate, brutal necessities of survival. They did not, and could not conceive of building anything permanent, let alone monumental. According to this universally accepted model, everything changed with a single, crucial invention: agriculture. Around 10,000 years ago, somewhere in the fertile crescent of the Middle East, humans learned to domesticate plants and animals. For the first time, we could control our food supply. This innovation was the great spark. Farming allowed nomads to settle down, creating permanent villages. These villages grew into towns, and eventually into the first great cities. With cities came social stratification, hierarchies of priests and kings, specialized labor, and the surplus of resources and time needed for complex thought. Only after all of these developments, thousands of years after the first seeds were planted, did organized religion and monumental architecture finally emerge. It was a neat, orderly progression. First agriculture, then settlement, then cities, then complex religion, and finally, great temples. This sequence was considered an unshakable law of human development. Civilization, we were told with absolute certainty, was born from a grain of wheat. But a story is only as strong as the evidence that supports it. And sometimes, a single discovery can emerge from the earth that does not just challenge the story, but proves it to be profoundly wrong. Our attention now turns to southeastern Turkey, to a remote and arid landscape not far from the Syrian border. Here, for time immemorial, a peculiar rounded hill has risen from the plains. The local people called it Göbekli Tepe, a Turkish name meaning potbelly hill. It was a place of local legends, a place some believed to be sacred, but to the outside world, it was just another feature of the landscape. In the 1960s, a team of archaeologists from the University of Chicago surveyed the hill. They noted the presence of some broken limestone slabs, and concluding they were nothing more than the remains of an abandoned medieval cemetery, they moved on, dismissing the site as unimportant. For 3 decades, Potbelly Hill kept its secret, slumbering beneath the Turkish Sunday. It was not until 1994 that another archaeologist cast his gaze upon the hill, but this time, with a different perspective. His name was Klaus Schmidt, a brilliant and intuitive researcher from the German Archaeological Institute. He had spent years excavating other Stone Age sites in the region and was intimately familiar with the types of artifacts they produced. While reviewing old survey documents, he came across the brief, dismissive report from the 1960s. But where the previous team had seen simple gravestones, Schmidt's experienced eye saw something else entirely. He suspected the limestone slabs were far, far older. He decided to visit the site himself. Upon arriving at Göbekli Tepe, Schmidt did not even need to dig. As he walked across the crown of the hill, he saw the tops of immense, masterfully carved stones protruding from the soil. They were shaped like the letter T, a design he had never seen before in any prehistoric context. In that moment of revelation, standing alone on that windswept hill, Klaus Schmidt understood. He was not standing on a forgotten cemetery. He was standing atop a creation of such antiquity and sophistication that it had no right to exist. He knew, with a certainty that would define the rest of his life, that if he started to dig here, he would either be proven a fool, or he would change the course of human history forever. His excavations began shortly thereafter, and what they revealed was beyond even his wildest expectations. As his team carefully brushed away the soil of millennia, they did not find a village or a settlement. There were no signs of domestic life, no hearths, no houses. Instead, they unearthed a complex of massive, circular structures. Each structure was defined by a ring of enormous monolithic pillars, connected by low stone walls. In the center of each ring stood 2 even larger T-shaped pillars, facing one another as if in silent communion. The scale was breathtaking. The pillars weighed between 10 and 20 tons each, with the largest in the quarry nearby weighing an astonishing 50 tons. They were carved from single blocks of limestone, transported from quarries hundreds of meters away, and erected with a precision that would challenge engineers today. And then there were the carvings. The surfaces of the pillars were covered in a menagerie of exquisitely detailed animal reliefs. There were snarling foxes, powerful boars, venomous snakes, spiders, and scorpions. Cranes and vultures, symbols of the sky, were carved with an artist's touch. These were not simple depictions of animals hunted for food. They were stylized, symbolic, and mythic. They were the expressions of a complex and shared belief system, a window into the mind of our ancient ancestors. The T-shaped pillars themselves were clearly anthropomorphic, stylized representations of human beings with hands and arms carved in low relief along their sides. They were not just stones, they were beings, ancestors perhaps, or gods watching over the sacred enclosures. As the world of Göbekli Tepe was slowly revealed, the most crucial question remained. When was it built? Samples were taken, sent for radiocarbon dating, and the results came back. The results did not just create a new chapter in history, they tore the old book to shreds. The oldest layers of Göbekli Tepe were dated to approximately 9,600 years before Common Era. This means it was built more than 11,600 years ago. This number is so profound it is difficult to grasp. It is 6,000 years older than Stonehenge. It is 7,000 years older than the Great Pyramid of Giza. And most importantly, it is thousands of years older than the invention of pottery, the invention of writing, the domestication of animals, and the very first evidence of agriculture in the region. The unshakable law of civilization had been broken. The temple had come first. The people who built Göbekli Tepe were not farmers, they were hunter-gatherers. The very same people that history had dismissed as primitive, nomadic, and incapable of complex society had somehow managed to organize the labor of hundreds, if not thousands, of individuals. With nothing more than flint tools, they quarried, transported, and erected a 50-ton stone monolith. They built a cathedral on a hill, a vast ceremonial center, at a time when they were supposed to be living in simple huts. Their lives a constant struggle for existence. Everything was backward. Everything was wrong. Göbekli Tepe was an impossibility, a magnificent, undeniable fact that stood in direct opposition to the entire story of our ascent. This discovery did not just give us an older starting point for architecture, it forced us to ask terrifyingly large questions. It prompted Klaus Schmidt to propose a revolutionary new theory. He argued that the old model was completely upside down. It was not agriculture that led to complex society and religion. He proposed that it was the very human need for a complex religion, the primal urge to gather and build something sacred like Göbekli Tepe, that was the true spark of civilization. The immense logistical challenge of feeding and housing the hundreds of workers required for such a project, over many decades, may have been the exact pressure that forced humanity to innovate, to learn how to cultivate wild grains and manage wild herds. In essence, the temple did not come from the farm. The farm came from the need to build the temple. And what was the purpose of this temple? What beliefs animated its creators? The carvings offer tantalizing clues. Vultures are a common motif, often shown alongside headless human bodies. This has led to speculation about sky burials, a practice where the dead are left exposed to be consumed by birds of prey, a ritual of excarnation to release the soul. Are the T-pillars representing powerful gods, or revered ancestors who watch over these sacred rites? Was this a center for pilgrimage, a place where nomadic bands from hundreds of kilometers around would gather to share beliefs, trade knowledge, and reinforce their cosmic order? We are looking at the remnants of a rich and powerful spiritual world that existed and vanished before what we call history even began. Yet, the most profound mystery of Göbekli Tepe may not be its construction, but its death. Around the year 8000 before Common Era, after more than 1500 years of use, the site was abandoned. But it was not simply left to the mercy of the elements. Its creators did something that continues to baffle archaeologists to this day. They deliberately and carefully buried their entire creation. Over a period of centuries, they backfilled all of the sacred enclosures with millions of cubic feet of earth, stone, and animal bones, intentionally creating the artificial potbelly hill that would protect their work for the next 10,000 years. Why? Why would a culture go to such immense effort to entomb its most sacred achievement? Was it a ritual act, a way of putting the spirits of the temple to sleep at the end of their era? Was it an act of preservation, a desperate attempt to hide their holy place from a coming catastrophe or a rival culture? Or was it something else entirely? We do not know. The people of Göbekli Tepe buried their temple, and in doing so, they buried their own story. Just as the Qesem Cave discovery shatters our timeline of who we are biologically, Göbekli Tepe shatters our timeline of who we are culturally and spiritually. It is definitive proof of a high culture existing in the depths of the last ice age, a culture that emerged, flourished, and vanished, leaving behind only a silent, magnificent circle of stone sentinels, waiting patiently beneath the earth to tell us that our story is far older and far stranger than we have ever known. The architectural wonders of Qesem Cave and Göbekli Tepe force us to accept that our physical history, the history written in stone and bone, is profoundly incomplete. But there is another kind of history, one written not in monuments but in words, in the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and where we come from. For centuries in the Western world, one book stood as the ultimate source for our most ancient origins, the Bible. Its stories of creation, of the Garden of Eden, and of a great flood were considered the definitive foundational truths of the human experience. They were unique, sacred, and believed to be the oldest and most authentic accounts in existence. The date was the 3rd of December, 1872. The Society of Biblical Archaeology was holding a conference, a gathering of the most respected minds in the field. These were men of stature and learning, seasoned archaeologists and theological scholars, men who had built their careers upon the unquestioned primacy of the scriptures. They sat in an old hall, the air thick with academic self-assurance. As the morning session drew to a close, a sense of impatience began to stir. There was just one final speaker to get through, a man who was not a celebrated professor or a renowned explorer, but a temporary employee at the British Museum, a self-taught amateur named George Smith. No one expected much from him. George Smith took the stage, a figure described as being as thin as a bamboo stick, unassuming and out of place amongst the academic titans in the audience. He was an engraver by trade who had obsessively taught himself to read the complex, wedge-shaped script of ancient Assyria and Babylonia, the script known as cuneiform. His expedition had not been to the sun-scorched plains of Mesopotamia, but into the quiet, dusty backrooms of the museum, where he spent countless hours hunched over broken fragments of ancient clay tablets, piecing them together like an impossible jigsaw puzzle. As he began to speak, the whispers and rustling papers in the hall slowly died down. He spoke of his work, of a particular collection of tablets from the library of the ancient king Ashurbanipal, and then he made his announcement. He told the assembled scholars that on one of these fragments he had found a story. It was the story of a great flood, a deluge sent by the gods to punish mankind. It was the story of a wise man who, warned of the coming cataclysm, builds a great ship. He tells of how this man gathers his family and all the animals of the earth onto the boat, seals the door, and survives the world-drowning storm. He speaks of the boat coming to rest upon a mountain, and of the man sending out birds to see if the waters had receded. The audience was transfixed. The story was, in almost every essential detail, the story of Noah and his ark from the book of Genesis. But then came the academic earthquake. George Smith explained, his voice steady, that the tablet containing this story was not from ancient Israel. It was from Mesopotamia, and based on the language and context, it was demonstrably clear that this version of the story had been written down more than 1,000 years before the oldest parts of the Bible were ever composed. He went on to state that other foundational stories, such as the creation of the first man by a divine hand, were also present on these far more ancient tablets. A stunned, frozen silence fell over the hall. In a single afternoon, this quiet, determined amateur had completely reoriented the landscape of ancient history. The Bible, the book considered the origin point of history, was suddenly shown to be an inheritor of tradition, not its source. The story of the flood was not a singular, miraculous event recorded in one holy book, but a powerful narrative that had existed for a millennium prior, a cultural memory that belonged to the wider civilization of Mesopotamia. The scholars could not dismiss him as a crank or a heretic, because he had done what no one. It ignited a firestorm of excitement and controversy across Europe, kicking off a veritable fever for Mesopotamian archaeology. Museums and universities began funding massive expeditions to the lands of modern-day Iraq, desperate to unearth more of this forgotten library of human knowledge. They were searching for the originals, for the source code of our most sacred stories. And it was this feverish search, sparked by George Smith, that would eventually lead to the full recovery and translation of the great Mesopotamian epics, namely the Epic of Gilgamesh, which contained the flood story he found, and another, even older creation story, known as the Atrahasis. It is within the strange, alien narrative of the Atrahasis that we find not just a parallel to the Bible, but a detailed, systematic account of humanity's creation for a purpose so bizarre and specific, it would ultimately provide a terrifying, potential context for the impossible discoveries made at places like Qesem Cave. George Smith's discovery did more than just prove the biblical stories were not unique. It gave us the key. A key to a library of knowledge far older. A library that contained the original, unedited, and far stranger account of human origins. This account is most clearly laid out in the epic poem known as the Atrahasis. It is not a story of a benevolent, all-powerful God creating humanity in his image. It is a story of cosmic conflict, of divine exhaustion, and of a pragmatic, almost industrial, solution to a labor crisis. To understand this story is to understand how the ancient Sumerians saw their place in the universe, and it is a vision that is both humbling and terrifying. In the time before time, in an age when the earth was young and the first rivers were still charting their courses, humanity did not exist. The world was the sole domain of the gods. But these gods were not idle. They were builders, engineers, and laborers. The divine society was divided into two distinct classes. There were the senior gods, the great Anunnaki, who were the council of rulers, the decision-makers who resided in celestial splendor. And then there were the junior gods, the Igigi, and it was their task to perform all of the labor required to make the earth habitable and productive. Their burden was immense. It was the Igigi who were commanded to dig out the great life-giving rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, carving their paths through the harsh, primordial landscape. It was they who dredged the vast network of canals that would one day irrigate the Mesopotamian plain. It was they who were tasked with heaping up the mountains and shaping the world according to the designs of their Anunnaki masters. For 40 long periods, which the texts number as 3,600 years, the Igigi endured this relentless toil. They worked day and night, their divine muscles aching, their spirits growing heavy with resentment. The work was endless, the burden was insufferable, and they could see no end to their servitude. Finally, after millennia of forced labor, they broke. In an act of collective desperation and fury, the Igigi declared their rebellion. They set fire to their tools, their spades and baskets burning as a signal of their defiance. They abandoned their work sites and, as one unified, angry mob, they marched on the great mountain dwelling of their chief overseer, the powerful Anunnaki god named Enlil. The texts describe Enlil's reaction with vivid detail. He was terrified by the sight of the approaching mob, the clamor of the rebellious gods shaking the very gates of his temple. He bolted his doors and sent word to the other great Anunnaki, summoning them to an emergency council. The sky god Anu, the ruler of the heavens, descended, and the wise and clever god of the abyss, the master of science and water, the great Enki, was also in attendance. The council of the great gods confronted the weary Igigi, and they listened to their complaints. They saw their suffering, and they acknowledged the truth of their words. The work was simply too great, the toil too severe. The Anunnaki were faced with an existential crisis. The essential work on Earth had to continue, but their divine workforce was on strike, refusing to lift another finger. The cosmic project was in jeopardy. It was in this moment of divine crisis that the resourceful god Enki proposed a solution, a plan so audacious and revolutionary it would change the nature of the earth forever. He addressed the assembly, saying, "In effect, while the mother goddess is present, let her create a new being, a substitute. Let us fashion a mortal, so that this new being can be charged with the toil of the gods." His proposal was to create a primitive worker, a slave race, designed specifically to take over the burden of the Ijiji. The other gods agreed, recognizing the brilliance of the plan. The process they undertook was not a clean or simple act of creation. It was a complex, biological, and almost alchemical procedure. Enki decreed that the mother goddess, who is also called Nintu or Mami, would need the proper raw materials. The first ingredient was clay, the primordial substance of the earth itself, mixed with the water of Enki's abyss. But mere clay was lifeless. It lacked will, spirit, and intelligence. It needed a divine component to animate it. It needed the ghost of a god. And so, the council made a grim decision. One of the gods would have to be sacrificed, his essence used to elevate the new creation. A god named Ila, who the texts describe as having intelligence, was chosen for this purpose. He was slain, and his flesh and blood were collected. The mother goddess Nintu then took the clay, and she mixed into it the flesh and blood of the slain god, a divine leavening agent that would give the new beings a measure of the god's own spirit. From this bloody, consecrated clay, the first humans were formed. They were called the Lulu Amelu, which translates to the mixed one, a hybrid being of terrestrial matter and divine essence, brought into existence for a single explicit purpose: to serve. The great Anunnaki proclaimed, "We have relieved the Ijiji of their heavy work and passed their toil on to man." The divine strike was over. The age of human labor had begun. For thousands of years, this was how the story was understood. It was a foundational myth, a religious tale, explaining the origins of mankind and our difficult place in the cosmic order, forever bound to a life of labor to serve the gods who created us. But what if it was not a myth at all? In the 20th century, a controversial author and scholar named Zecharia Sitchin offered a new and electrifying interpretation. He took the texts, not as sacred allegory, but as factual, historical, and technical documents, and in doing so, he reframed the entire story. Sitchin argued that the beings the Sumerians called the Anunnaki were not supernatural gods, but were in fact flesh and blood extraterrestrial visitors, astronauts from another world. According to Sitchin's reading of the texts, this world was a planet within our own solar system, a planet the Sumerians called Nibiru. Nibiru, he claimed, had a vast 3,600-year elliptical orbit that brought it through the inner solar system only periodically. The inhabitants of Nibiru were facing a dire environmental catastrophe. Their planet's atmosphere was decaying, threatening all life. Their scientists determined that the only solution was to suspend fine particles of gold in their upper atmosphere to patch the damage, creating an artificial shield. But they lacked this crucial metal in sufficient quantities. So, they set out on a mission into the solar system, looking for a planet rich with gold. Their journey brought them here, to Earth. Viewed through this science fiction lens, the entire Atrahasis epic transforms. The Anunnaki arrival on Earth was not a divine act, but a colonial expedition with a clear industrial purpose: to extract gold. Enlil was not a god of the storm, but the mission commander. Enki was not a god of magic, but the chief science officer. The Ijiji were not lesser gods, but the rank-and-file astronauts, the engineers and pilots who were tasked with the grueling physical labor of the mining operations, likely in the gold-rich regions of southern Africa. Their rebellion was not a theological dispute. It was a mutiny by a colonial workforce, exhausted after thousands of years of hard labor on a foreign planet, far from their home. Enki's brilliant solution, therefore, was not a feat of magic, but a feat of advanced genetic engineering. The clay of the earth he used as his raw material was the most advanced primate then living on the planet, the hominin species we know as the Homo erectus, and the flesh and blood of a sacrificed god was the essence of the Anunnaki themselves, their DNA. The story of mixing the god's blood into the clay is reinterpreted as a detailed, if poetic, description of a genetic hybridization project. Enki and the mother goddess Nintu, the chief medical officer, took the ovum of a female Homo erectus and fertilized it with the DNA of a young Anunnaki male. They then implanted the resulting embryo into the womb of an Anunnaki female who acted as a surrogate mother. The result of this procedure was the first Homo sapiens, a new species, a hybrid, carrying the genetic code of both a terrestrial primate and a highly advanced extraterrestrial race. This interpretation recasts our own genesis in a stunning and deeply unsettling light. We were not created to worship our creators. We were created to replace them in the minds. We were designed to be intelligent enough to understand complex instructions and use sophisticated tools, but to remain biologically bound to a shorter lifespan and a subservient nature. Our divine spark is, in this model, their alien DNA. This theory, while dismissed by mainstream academia, provides a startlingly coherent, if radical, explanation for some of our greatest scientific puzzles. It could account for the so-called missing link in the human fossil record and the sudden, inexplicable explosion in brain size and cognitive ability that sets Homo sapiens apart from all other hominins. Most importantly, it provides a narrative that accommodates the impossible timeline presented by sites like Qesem Cave. A 400,000-year-old human presence in the Levant makes little sense in the standard evolutionary model, but it fits perfectly with the idea of an ancient extraterrestrial presence that had been operating on Earth for eons, and that created its workforce hundreds of thousands of years ago. The question is which story we choose to believe. Are we the beloved but flawed children of the gods, as depicted in myth, or are we the abandoned product of an alien genetic experiment, a slave race left behind after the mining operation was complete? The tablets haven't changed. Only the lens through which we dare look at them has. It's a big question, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy unpacking these tough questions together, consider subscribing. If the story of the Anunnaki were an isolated one, a unique myth from a single, long-dead culture, one might be tempted to dismiss it as a fantastical creation myth, and nothing more. It is strange, yes. It is specific, yes, but without context, it remains a curiosity. What transforms this story from a local legend into a global enigma is a phenomenon that archaeologists and historians have long observed but have struggled to explain: the echo. It is the discovery that when you listen closely to the foundational myths of ancient cultures all across the world, cultures that were supposedly separated by impassable oceans and millennia of time, you begin to hear the same story being told, over and over again. It is as if we have found not one ancient tablet, but dozens, all describing the same core event from a slightly different perspective. To see this pattern, we must first establish a blueprint, a clear profile of the civilizer god, as described by the Sumerians. Let us deconstruct the Anunnaki narrative not as a story, but as a template of characteristics. First, there is their origin. They are not of this earth. They came from the sky, from the heavens, and are explicitly described as visitors. Second, there is their appearance. They are often depicted as being physically distinct from the human population they create and govern. Third, and most crucially, is their mission. They are not just creators, they are teachers. They are credited with bringing humanity the essential building blocks of civilization, including agriculture, architecture, law, mathematics, and astronomy. Fourth, there is their legacy. They are directly associated with the construction of great megalithic structures, feats of engineering that often defy the known capabilities of the time. And finally, there is their departure. After establishing civilization and ruling for a time, they leave the earth, very often with a solemn promise that they will one day return. This, then, is our blueprint, the sky god teacher. Now, let us take this template and travel halfway around the world, leaving the deserts of Mesopotamia far behind, to a continent that should have had absolutely no contact with the ancient Near East, South America. In the thin, crisp air of the high Andes, among the descendants of the Inca Empire and the even older cultures that preceded them, we hear the story of a great creator god named Viracocha. Let us apply our blueprint. First, his origin. Viracocha is said to have emerged from the waters of Lake Titicaca after a great world-altering flood. He was a wanderer, a a stranger in a strange land, not a native of the Andes. Second, his appearance. The legends are remarkably consistent. Viracocha was described as a tall, white-skinned man with a beard, who wore long white robes and carried a staff. This description is a stark and obvious contrast to the physical appearance of the indigenous Andean peoples. Third, his mission. The myths are explicit that Viracocha was the great civilizer. He traveled the length of the Andes, and he found the survivors of the flood living in a primitive, disorganized state. It was Viracocha who taught them the arts of agriculture, of building with stone, of weaving textiles, and of social order. He brought them from a state of savagery into a state of civilization. Fourth, his legacy. The Inca themselves, who were master builders, openly admitted that the most incredible stone structures in their empire, places like the impossible citadel of Puma Punku and the great city of Tiahuanaco, were not built by them. They claimed these sites were constructed by a race of giants in a much earlier time, under the direct guidance of Viracocha himself. And finally, his departure. After completing his journey of teaching and creation, Viracocha walked to the Pacific coast. There he gathered his followers, gave them his final instructions, and then, as the legends say, he walked out upon the waves of the ocean, vanishing into the west, but not before promising that he would return in a future age. The pattern is a near-perfect match. The echo does not fade in the Andes. If we travel north, into the jungles and plateaus of Mesoamerica, we encounter another central figure in the pantheon of the Maya, the Toltecs, and the Aztecs. He was known as Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. Let us apply the blueprint once more. First, his origin. Quetzalcoatl was said to have arrived in Mexico from across the Eastern Sea, the Atlantic Ocean. He came on a boat, or, in some tellings, a raft of serpents. He was an outsider, a visitor from a distant land. Second, his appearance. Once again, the descriptions are strikingly similar. He was recorded as being a tall man, with light skin, a flowing beard, and blue eyes. Third, his mission. Just like Viracocha, he was a bringer of knowledge. He taught the people the secrets of mathematics and the intricate workings of the calendar. He brought them the arts of agriculture, teaching them to cultivate maize, and he gave them the knowledge of astronomy. He was a god of peace who forbade the bloody practice of human sacrifice, establishing a golden age of learning and culture. He was, in every sense of the word, a civilizer. Fourth, his legacy. His teachings are associated with the rise of the great cities and pyramids of Mesoamerica, centers of immense astronomical and mathematical knowledge like Teotihuacan. And finally, his departure. The legends tell that he was eventually driven out by a rival god, Tezcatlipoca, a promoter of war and sacrifice. Quetzalcoatl sailed back to the east, across the ocean from which he came, promising his followers that he or his descendants would one day return from that same direction, a promise that would tragically seal the fate of the Aztec Empire when the bearded, light-skinned Hernan Cortés arrived on their shores. The pattern is undeniable, and it is global. In ancient Babylonia, the myth of Oannes tells of an amphibious being who emerged from the sea to teach early humans writing, art, and science. In Egypt, the early rulers were known as the Shemsu Hor, the followers of Horus, who were described as the wise and powerful bringers of civilization in the age before the pharaohs. The Dogon people of Mali have for centuries held a complex cosmology based on the teachings of the Nommo, amphibious beings they claim came to Earth from the Sirius star system in a great ship. The list goes on, an echoing chorus across continents and millennia. We are therefore left with a profound choice between two explanations. Is it more likely that dozens of completely isolated ancient cultures all, by sheer coincidence, independently invented the exact same, highly specific myth of a tall, bearded, light-skinned teacher god who arrived from the sky or sea, gave them the blueprint for civilization, and then departed with a promise to return? Or is it more likely that these are not separate myths at all, but are in fact separate eyewitness accounts of a single, real, global event? Are these cultures all describing the same group of visitors, the same civilizing mission that took place in our deep past. Are Viracocha, Quetzalcoatl, and Oannes simply different regional names for the very same beings that the Sumerians, in their first-hand account, called the Anunnaki? The echo from the past seems to suggest that humanity's first contact with beings from another world was not a myth, but history. If the ancient texts are the ghost of our forgotten history, then the stones we are about to visit are its body. For if a group of advanced beings, be they the Anunnaki or any other, truly did operate on this planet in deep antiquity, they would not have left behind only stories. They would have left behind infrastructure. They would have built things. And if they wanted those things to last for hundreds of thousands of years, they would have built them out of the most durable material available, stone. We now embark on a journey not of textual analysis, but of forensic engineering. We will visit two sites on opposite ends of the Earth, sites so baffling in their construction that they defy conventional historical explanation. They are silent testaments to a level of technological mastery that should not have existed. Our first destination takes us to the fertile Bekaa Valley of modern-day Lebanon. Here, under the watchful gaze of the mountains, lies the legendary complex of Baalbek. Most visitors are drawn to the magnificent and sprawling Roman temples, dedicated to Jupiter, Bacchus, and Venus. They are, without doubt, some of the most impressive ruins of the Roman Empire. But we are not here today to look at the Roman work. We are here to see what lies beneath it. For the Romans, who were themselves arguably the greatest engineers of the ancient world, chose to build their most important temple complex not on virgin ground, but upon a pre-existing, much older, and far more massive stone platform. The question that has haunted researchers for centuries is simple. Who built the platform the Romans chose as their foundation, and how? Let us walk together to the western edge of this great platform. Here, the true mystery of Baalbek reveals itself in a way that is humbling and absolute. Embedded in the retaining wall is a series of 3 colossal stones known to the world as the Trilithon. Let us try to comprehend their scale. They are 3 monolithic blocks of limestone, perfectly cut and dressed. Each stone is approximately 64 feet long, 14 feet high, and 12 feet thick. To put that in perspective, if you were to stand one on its end, it would be taller than a 5-story building. Now, let us consider their weight. Each individual stone of the Trilithon is estimated to weigh a staggering 800 tons. That is 1.6 million pounds. The weight of 500 modern passenger cars, or 3 of the largest commercial airliners, compressed into a single, perfectly rectangular block of stone. Now, imagine yourself standing at its base. It fills your entire field of vision, a solid wall of ancient hewn rock stretching out before you. The conventional historical explanation is that the Romans, using enormous treadwheel cranes and armies of laborers, managed to move these stones. But the questions that arise from this scene are profound. How is a single stone of 800 tons quarried from the bedrock with such flawless precision? How was it then transported over a kilometre of uneven terrain from the nearby quarry to this very spot? And the most baffling question of all, how was this 1.6 million pound object lifted more than 20 feet into the air and slotted into this wall with such accuracy that, in many places, you cannot slide a single sheet of paper between it and the stone next to it? Even our largest modern mobile cranes, with all their power and advanced engineering, would be stretched to their absolute limits to perform such a lift. To achieve this level of precision placement would be considered a near impossibility. And if any doubt remains about the scale of the ambition of these original builders, we need only take a short walk to the quarry itself. There, lying at an angle, as if it were just about to be shipped out, is a stone that is even larger. It is known as the Hajar al-Hibla, or the Stone of the South. This single, fully quarried monolith is 136 feet long and is estimated to weigh an unbelievable 1,242 tons. It is a silent testament to a project that was, for some reason, left unfinished. In recent years, further excavations in the same quarry have revealed other, even larger blocks, with one estimated to weigh as much as 1,650 tons. These are not natural rock formations. They are quarried, cut, and shaped, ready for transport. The existence of these stones proves that the trilithon was not a fluke. It proves that whoever built the platform at Baalbek had a routine, systematic method for quarrying and moving stones of a size that we would find nearly impossible to manage today. The Romans did not build this platform. They inherited it. They built their temple upon it as an act of deference to a race of builders so far beyond their own capabilities that they could only have been regarded as gods. Let us now leave the mystery of impossible weight behind and travel across the globe to a place where the mystery is one of impossible precision. Our journey takes us high into the Andes Mountains of Bolivia, to the desolate, wind-swept Altiplano, 13,000 feet above sea level. Here, near the shores of Lake Titicaca, lies the ruins of a site known as Puma Punku, which means the gateway of the Puma. Unlike the towering structure of Baalbek, what we find here is a scene of utter devastation. It looks less like a ruined temple and more like a cosmic construction set that was knocked over and shattered by some unimaginable cataclysm. The ground is littered with enormous, intricately carved stone blocks, scattered like fallen dominoes. But as we walk among these ruins, we must look closer, forget the scale for a moment, and focus on the details. The stones here are not limestone. They are primarily andesite and diorite, two of the hardest forms of rock on this planet, so dense and durable that they are second only to diamond in their resistance to being worked. Yet, these stones have been shaped with a finesse and precision that is simply breathtaking. Run your hand along the surface of one of the great slabs. It is perfectly flat, polished to a finish as smooth as a modern kitchen countertop. Examine the edges. They are not rounded or chipped from crude hammering. They are razor sharp, forming perfect 90-degree angles that seem to have been machined. Among the scattered blocks, we find the famous H blocks. These are complex, interlocking stones, each one carved with multiple planes, interior corners, and perfectly flat surfaces, and each one is identical to the others. They look as if they were mass-produced, created from a single, perfect mold. How could a culture, which conventional archaeology places around 500 Anno Domini, a culture without writing, without the wheel, and with only bronze and stone tools, have achieved such results? Ask any modern stonemason or engineer how they would replicate one of these H blocks from a solid piece of andesite using only ancient tools. They will tell you that it is not merely difficult, it is functionally impossible. The time required would be immense, but the precision itself, the perfectly flat planes and sharp interior angles, is the true mystery. And the enigma only deepens. As we examine the shattered fragments, we find even more baffling features. We see long, perfectly straight grooves, some only millimeters wide, cut deep into the hard rock. We see lines of tiny, perfectly round holes, drilled into the stone with the regularity of a machine. What kind of handheld tool, powered only by muscle, could drill such holes into solid diorite? The evidence before our eyes does not speak of stone hammers and patient abrasion with sand and water. It speaks of a different kind of technology altogether. The clean cuts, the sharp interior corners, and the drill holes are signatures not of carving, but of cutting, perhaps with tools that used high-frequency vibration, intense heat, or some other advanced principle we cannot yet understand. Puma Punku does not feel like it was built. It feels like it was manufactured. So here we are, standing in the long shadows of two impossible sites, separated by an ocean, and what we are told is thousands of years of separate, disconnected human development. At Baalbek, we are confronted with a technology of impossible power, the ability to quarry and lift stones of a weight that defies our understanding of the ancient world. At Puma Punku, we are confronted with a technology of impossible finesse, the ability to shape the hardest stones on the planet with the precision of a 21st century machine shop. Are these two separate, unrelated mysteries, born of the isolated genius of two different ancient peoples? If you want to continue your journey of discovering other mysterious civilizations, I have prepared a special playlist called Lost Civilizations for you to dig deeper. So are these two separate, unrelated mysteries, born from the single genius of two different ancient peoples? Or are we looking at separate but related signs of a lost, global, high technology, the technology of the enlightened gods, the Anunnaki, who left their fingerprints not only in our mythology and DNA, but right here, on indestructible stones? The evidence we have examined thus far in our biology, our culture, and our engineering points to a single, disruptive conclusion: the existence of a highly advanced and ancient human presence on this planet, a presence that is completely unaccounted for in our history books. But this conclusion immediately gives rise to its own, even larger question. If such a civilization, or even a network of such advanced peoples truly existed, where did it go? Why is our recorded history only a few thousand years old, a short and sudden burst of activity after hundreds of thousands of years of apparent silence? Why does the story of humanity seem to begin again from scratch in Sumer and in Egypt? To answer this, we must reopen the oldest and coldest case file in human memory, a case that has been dismissed for centuries as mere mythology. We must investigate the Great Flood. For thousands of years, the incident report of this event has been preserved. We have already heard the Sumerian version in the Atrahasis and the Epic of Gilgamesh, a detailed account of the god Enlil's decision to destroy mankind with a deluge, and the god Enki's secret intervention to save one man, Utnapishtim, by having him build a great ark. This account was later echoed in the Hebrew Bible, in the familiar story of Noah. But what transforms this from a local story into a case of global significance are the hundreds of corroborating witness statements from virtually every corner of the ancient world. In India, the Hindu Vedas tell of Manu, a wise man warned by the god Vishnu of a coming flood, who builds a great boat and saves humanity. In ancient Greece, the story of Deucalion and Pyrrha tells of a bronze race of men so wicked that Zeus decides to wipe them out with a flood, saving only the righteous couple in a wooden chest. Across the ocean, the Aztec traditions of Mesoamerica speak of a man named Coxcox and his wife, who survived a great deluge in a hollowed-out cypress log. The details vary, but the core components of the testimony remain hauntingly consistent across cultures that had no possible contact with one another. There is almost always a divine warning given to a chosen righteous family. There is the construction of a vessel to survive the cataclysm. There is the deliberate saving of animals to repopulate the world. And there is the ultimate outcome, a world washed clean, a great reset from which a new cycle of humanity begins. For a long time, the official explanation from mainstream science was that these were simply myths, primitive allegories, or perhaps exaggerated memories of local river floods, like the annual flooding of the Nile or the Tigris and Euphrates. The case was considered closed, but this explanation always felt insufficient. It failed to account for the sheer terror, the global scale, and the world-ending finality described in these ancient testimonies. A river flood, no matter how severe, does not end an entire age of the world. But in recent decades, a new team of investigators, armed with the tools of modern geology, chemistry, and physics, have found a layer of startling new forensic evidence in the Earth's soil, and this evidence has cracked the cold case wide open. This new evidence is found at a specific and crucial moment in our planet's recent geological history, the boundary of a mysterious cold spell known as the Younger Dryas, which began abruptly approximately 12,800 years ago. The climatic context is key. At that time, the Earth was emerging from the last great ice age. The planet was warming, the massive continental ice sheets were melting, and life was beginning to flourish. Then, suddenly, with no warning, something catastrophic happened. The warming trend reversed, and the planet was plunged back into a deep, brutal freeze that lasted for more than 1,000 years. For decades, the cause of this sudden reversal was a complete mystery. But as scientists looked closer at the thin layer of sediment that marks the beginning of this period, the Younger Dryas boundary layer, they found a set of forensic fingerprints that could only point to one culprit. All across North America, and now being found on other continents as well, there is a black mat, a thin, dark layer of carbon-rich soil. Below this mat, we find the abundant fossils of the great Ice Age megafauna mammoths, mastodons, saber-toothed cats, and the tools of the ancient Clovis people who hunted them. Above this black mat, they are all gone. It is a geological tombstone. Within this boundary layer, scientists began to find microscopic clues that could not be explained by any normal terrestrial process. They found nanodiamonds, tiny crystals that are only formed under the kind of extreme temperature and pressure generated by a high-velocity cosmic impact. They found melt-glass spherules, microscopic droplets of rock that had been flash-melted at thousands of degrees and then cooled instantly as they were thrown through the atmosphere. And most damning of all, they found a global platinum spike, a dramatic and anomalous increase in the concentration of the rare element platinum, an element that is far more abundant in asteroids and comets than it is in the Earth's crust. These clues, taken together, form the unmistakable forensic signature of a catastrophic collision between our planet and an object from outer space. With this new forensic evidence, the investigators could finally reconstruct the crime. The leading theory is now known as the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. Around 12,800 years ago, our planet passed through the debris stream of a large, disintegrating comet. It was not a single, solid asteroid that left a neat crater. It was a swarm of fragments, many of them kilometers wide, that rained down across the northern hemisphere. Several of these large fragments are believed to have slammed directly into the North American ice sheet, a vast glacier that was still, in places, more than a mile thick. The sequence of events that followed would have been apocalyptic. The immediate effect of the airbursts and impacts would have been a wave of thermal energy, a blast of unimaginable heat that would have ignited continent-spanning wildfires. This explains the black mat layer, the charred remains of the forests and grasslands of North America. The sheer volume of soot, dust, and water vapor ejected into the upper atmosphere would have created a thick, dark shroud around the planet, blocking out the sun's light and causing global temperatures to plummet. This was the trigger for the sudden deep freeze of the Younger Dryas, an impact winter that would last for 1,200 years. But the most devastating effect, the one that directly connects our science to our myth, was the flood. The heat of the impacts on the Laurentide ice sheet would have flash-melted a volume of ice that is nearly impossible for the human mind to comprehend. This was not a slow, gentle melt. This was a sudden, catastrophic release of water. A torrent of cold, fresh water, mud, and city-sized icebergs would have roared across the North American continent, scouring the landscape down to the bedrock and pouring into the oceans. The evidence for these mega-floods is still visible today in the channeled scablands of Washington state. This sudden, massive influx of cold, fresh water into the North Atlantic would have shut down the planet's great ocean conveyor system, the currents that distribute heat around the globe, thereby locking the planet into its new, frozen state. And the impacts themselves, along with the immense displacement of water, would have triggered mega tsunamis, hundreds of feet high, that would have washed over the coastlines of every continent on Earth. Suddenly, the witness statements of our ancient ancestors no longer sound like primitive myths. They sound like the traumatized, but remarkably accurate, accounts of real, observable events. The darkness that covered the world was the soot-filled sky of the impact winter. The fire that fell from the heavens was the rain of cometary fragments. And the world-ending flood was not a local river overflowing its banks. It was the combined, global catastrophe of glacial meltwater floods and planet-sweeping tsunamis. This, then, was the Great Reset. If a global, advanced human civilization existed before 12,800 years ago, the seafaring, megalith-building civilization whose fingerprints we see at Göbekli Tepe, Baalbek, and Puma Punku, this is the event that erased it from history. Its coastal cities and centers of knowledge would have been obliterated. Its population would have been decimated. The few, scattered survivors would have been thrown back into a dark age, their high technology lost, their primary focus now a desperate struggle for survival on a frozen and devastated planet. All that would be left of their former world would be the most indestructible of their stone monuments, built on the highest and safest ground, and their stories. the fragmented, terrifying memory of a world destroyed by fire and water from the sky, a story that would be passed down from generation to generation, becoming the legend of the Great Flood. The cold case is no longer cold. The mechanism for a global cataclysm is now firmly written in the geological record. The flood was real, and it was the event that drew a dark, impenetrable curtain across our timeline, separating our current world from the great, forgotten world that came before. For decades, the story of human evolution was a simple and linear one. It was a story of replacement. Archaic human species like the Neanderthals were seen as evolutionary dead ends, primitive cousins who were simply outcompeted and driven to extinction by the arrival of the intellectually superior Homo sapiens. Our own species was considered pure, a clean lineage that had spread out from Africa and replaced all others without interacting with them. This was the clean and tidy narrative. But when the first full sequence of the Neanderthal genome was completed in the year 2010, this narrative was utterly demolished. The geneticists conducting this archaeological dig into our past made a landmark discovery. They found that the genomes of all modern non-African humans contained clear and undeniable evidence of Neanderthal DNA. The percentage is small, typically between 1 and 4%, but its presence is irrefutable. This was not a story of replacement, it was a story of assimilation. Our ancestors did not just live alongside their Neanderthal cousins, they interbred with them. We are their descendants, carrying their genetic echo within us to this day. This discovery was a revolution in itself, proving that our lineage was not as pure as we had once believed. But it was only the first layer of the dig. Shortly after, another discovery was made, this one even more remarkable. In a cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia, archaeologists found a tiny fragment of a finger bone and a single molar tooth. The fossils themselves were unremarkable, but when the DNA was extracted and sequenced, it revealed a story of a completely new and unknown branch of the human family. They were not Neanderthals, and they were not modern humans. They were a distinct lineage, who came to be known as the Denisovans, named after the cave where their only physical remains have ever been found. Once the Denisovan genetic code was mapped, scientists could once again search for its signature in the DNA of modern humans, and they found it. Traces of Denisovan DNA are found in many modern Asian populations, but they appear in their highest concentrations, up to 5% of the total genome in the indigenous peoples of Melanesia, Papua New Guinea, and Australia. The story had become more complex still. Our direct ancestors had not only interbred with Neanderthals in the Middle East and Europe, but they had also interbred with this mysterious Denisovan population in Asia. The neat, branching tree of human evolution was revealed to be a fiction. The reality was a tangled, braided stream, with different human populations flowing apart and then coming back together, mixing and merging over hundreds of thousands of years. Our genome was not a single story. It was a mosaic, a patchwork quilt stitched together from the genetic fabric of multiple, distinct human species. This revelation was profound, but the deepest and most unsettling layer of the genetic dig was yet to come. As the computer algorithms used to analyze ancient DNA became more powerful, geneticists began to notice anomalies, sections of our genetic code that seemed out of place. They found ancient genes that did not seem to come from our primary Homo sapiens ancestors, but they also did not match the newly sequenced genomes of Neanderthals or Denisovans. They had the undeniable signature of an even older, more archaic lineage. They had found the genetic fingerprints of a ghost. This is the term they created for it. A ghost population, or a ghost ancestor. It is a population of ancient hominins for which we have no fossils, but whose existence can be inferred mathematically from the DNA of other ancient and modern humans. The first of these ghosts was discovered hiding inside the Denisovan genome itself. When scientists analyzed the DNA from that single finger bone, they found that the Denisovans had themselves interbred with another, even more ancient hominin species. This unknown group had split off from the main human line long before the ancestors of Neanderthals, Denisovans, and modern humans had gone their separate ways. perhaps as far back as 1 million years ago. Many suspect this ghost may have been Homo erectus, but we cannot be sure. What we do know is that a lost, ancient species of human left its genetic mark, and that mark has been carried forward into the present, hidden within the DNA of modern Melanesians. And then, a second, even more startling ghost appeared, this time in the DNA of modern Africans. Several recent studies analyzing the genomes of present-day West African populations, such as the Yoruba and the Mende, have found a significant genetic contribution from another, completely unknown archaic hominin. This ghost population appears to have diverged from the ancestors of modern humans and Neanderthals even earlier than the first ghost, and it contributed a substantial amount of genetic material, somewhere between 2 and 19%, to the genomes of the West African people we see today. Most remarkably, this interbreeding event appears to have happened relatively recently, perhaps as recently as 24,000 years ago. We are now faced with an undeniable scientific fact. Our species is not just a hybrid of Homo sapiens, Neanderthals and Denisovans. We are also a hybrid with at least 2 other ghost species of archaic humans that we cannot identify, for whom we have no name and no physical remains. Our DNA is a library containing volumes from authors whose identities are a complete mystery. Science, in its admirable and necessary caution, will wait. It will wait for a jawbone or a skull to be unearthed from the ancient soil of Africa or Asia, a fossil that can finally give these genetic ghosts a physical name and form. But as we wait, we must ask ourselves a provocative question. What if we have already been given the names of these ghosts? What if the story told to us by the Sumerians in the Atrahasis epic is not a myth, but a highly specific, biological claim that is now being corroborated by our most advanced genetic science? Let us revisit that ancient story through this new genetic lens. The Sumerian tablets claimed that modern humans, the Lulu Amalu, were not the product of a slow, natural evolution. They claimed we were a hybrid, a mixture. The recipe was specific. The clay of the earth, which in the Sitchin model represents a native, terrestrial hominin like Homo erectus, was mixed with the flesh and blood of the gods, the genetic material of the Anunnaki. This is a claim of genetic engineering, the deliberate creation of a new species by combining the DNA of 2 pre-existing ones. Now, look at the picture being painted by modern genetics. We see that our own Homo sapiens lineage did not evolve in isolation. It is a mix, a hybrid, containing genetic code from Neanderthals, Denisovans, and at least 2 unknown ghost populations. Could one of these ghost lineages be the genetic signature of that foundational terrestrial hominin the Sumerians called the clay of the earth? And could the strange, unclassified genes we carry, the very ones that contribute to the unique cognitive abilities that sparked the great leap forward in human consciousness, be the very Anunnaki DNA the texts speak of? Is it possible that the ancient epic poem written on clay thousands of years ago and the complex genetic story being decoded from our cells today are in fact telling us the exact same thing, that we are not one species, but a chimera, that our source code was edited? We have now dug through the strata of the Earth and the strata of our own genome, finding evidence of lost worlds and forgotten ancestors. But our investigation now leads us to a final and perhaps most disturbing type of archaeological site: the empty museum vault, the redacted field report, the story that has been deliberately and systematically erased. For what if the most profound evidence of our altered past is not something we can find, but is rather defined by its conspicuous absence? This leads us to a dark and persistent conspiracy theory, a story not of discovery, but of suppression. It is a story that claims that for over a century, a powerful and respected scientific institution has been at the center of a campaign to hide a truth so paradigm-shattering it had to be buried forever. This is the story of the Smithsonian Institution and the alleged genocide of the giants. Our investigation begins not in the ground, but in a forbidden archive, a collection of documents that tell a history of North America that you will not find in any official textbook. This archive is composed of the brittle, yellowed pages of over 1,000 local newspapers, published in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. They are dispatches from a younger, more unsettled America, written before history was fully standardized and consolidated, and they tell a consistent, continent-spanning, and utterly bizarre story. Let us examine some of these archived reports. The first document is from the year 1912. The New York Times reports on the discovery of 18 skeletons of extraordinary size, unearthed from a burial mound near Lake Delavan, Wisconsin. The report, based on the eyewitness accounts of the Peterson brothers who made the find, describes skeletons with frames that were, by their estimation, between 7 and 9 feet tall. But the strangeness did not end with their height. The skulls were reported to be elongated, with sloping foreheads, and many of the skeletons possessed a feature unheard of in human anatomy, a double row of teeth. The report concludes, as so many of them do, by stating that the discovery was being turned over to be investigated by professors from the State University and the Smithsonian Institution. After this, the trail goes cold. The 18 giant skeletons from Wisconsin were never seen or heard from again. Let us pull another file from the archive. The date is April 5th, 1909. The newspaper is the Arizona Gazette. The headline is sensational: Explorations in Grand Canyon. Mysteries of immense rich cavern brought to light. The article details the story of an explorer named G.E. Kincaid who, while rafting on the Colorado River, claimed to have discovered a massive, man-made cavern. Inside, he reported finding a vast citadel, filled with tablets bearing a form of Egyptian hieroglyphics, copper weapons, and most importantly, the mummified remains of a race of beings that were, he claimed, all over 8 or 9 feet tall. The article is highly specific, even naming the lead archaeologist dispatched to investigate by the Smithsonian, a Professor S.A. Jordan. Yet today, the Smithsonian Institution denies all knowledge of any such discovery, and claims that neither Kincaid nor Professor Jordan ever worked for them. The story, along with the giant mummies, has vanished into thin air. The archive is filled with hundreds of such accounts. From California, reports from the 1920s describe amateur archaeologist Ralph Glidden's work on Catalina Island, where he unearthed the remains of over 3,000 skeletons, many of which he claimed belonged to a race of 7 to 9 foot tall, fair-haired giants. From Ohio, countless reports describe skeletons with horned skulls being dug out of ancient burial mounds. From Pennsylvania, from Minnesota, from the Gulf Coast of Florida, the stories are the same. Immense skeletons, often with anomalous features like double rows of teeth, found in ancient settings, reported to the authorities, and then collected by agents from the Smithsonian or another official body, after which they disappear from all official records. So we are faced with a pattern, 1,000 scattered data points all telling the same story. What could possibly be the motive for such a widespread, century-long campaign of evidence suppression? Why would the nation's most prestigious museum actively seek to hide such a monumental discovery? The answer, the conspiracy theory claims, lies in the threat that these skeletons pose to the two foundational narratives of the 19th and 20th centuries, one scientific and one religious. First, let us consider the scientific narrative. The established theory of how the Americas were populated was, and still largely is, the Bering Strait land bridge theory. This theory holds that all indigenous peoples of the Americas are descended from Asian populations who migrated across a land bridge thousands of years ago. The discovery of a distinct, non-native race of giants, existing in North America long before these migrations, would utterly destroy this clean and simple model. It would prove that other, far more ancient and anomalous populations had existed on the continent. In an era of aggressive expansion and the doctrine of manifest destiny, the idea of an older, non-native, and highly sophisticated race having a prior claim to the land was an inconvenient truth that could not be allowed to stand. But the second threat was perhaps even more dangerous to the established order, for the existence of a race of giants did not just resonate with obscure Native American legends, like the Paiute stories of the red-haired Sita Ka giants of Nevada. it resonated with the Bible itself, specifically with the 6th chapter of the book of Genesis, which states, "There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown." This is the story of the Nephilim, the hybrid offspring of divine beings and human women. The discovery of giant, anomalous skeletons would be presented by many as physical, tangible proof of the literal truth of these biblical verses. In an age when science was desperately trying to separate itself from religious myth, the Smithsonian, as the gatekeeper of American science, could not allow its new, clean, Darwinian evolutionary narrative to be muddied by physical evidence that seemed to walk straight out of the pages of the Old Testament. The giants, therefore, had to disappear, so that both the scientific and the carefully curated secular narratives could remain intact. Of course, we must present the official story. The Smithsonian Institution today states unequivocally that this entire conspiracy is a fiction. They deny ever having collected any giant skeletons. They maintain that they have absolutely no such artifacts hidden in their archives. The official explanation for the 1,000+ newspaper articles is that they were a combination of hoaxes, yellow journalism designed to sell papers, and the misidentification of large animal bones, such as those of mammoths or mastodons, by untrained amateurs. They argue, quite reasonably, that if a race of giants had truly existed, the evidence would be overwhelming and undeniable, not confined to a collection of sensational and unverified news clippings from a bygone era. There is, to this day, no smoking gun, not a single, verifiable giant bone from any of these alleged discoveries is available for independent scientific analysis. And so, we are left at an impasse, with a choice between two narratives. Do we accept the official story that 1,000 separate reports from all across the country, often describing the same bizarre anatomical details, were all just hoaxes or mistakes? That they represent nothing more than a strange, collective delusion? Or do we entertain a more disturbing and far-reaching possibility? The possibility that the evidence was real, and that its suppression was simply one of the most successful intellectual campaigns in history. The possibility that a genocide which may have taken place in deep antiquity was followed, in our own modern age, by a quiet and systematic extermination of their memory. It forces us to ask a final, unsettling question. If it is possible for a story this big, a truth this fundamental to the history of a continent, to be curated, edited, and erased, then what else do we not know? This channel exists to ask such questions. If you too feel the urge to seek answers, make sure you turn on your notifications, because our investigation is far from over. We have reached the end of our long journey. What follows is not the history you have been taught, it is the lost history of the world, a narrative whispered by the evidence itself. Our story does not begin with primitive hunter-gatherers in the Fertile Crescent 6,000 years ago. Our story begins in a time of almost unimaginable antiquity, more than 400,000 years in the past. It begins with an arrival, a technologically advanced, spacefaring race, whom the Sumerians would later call the Anunnaki, came to our planet. Their purpose was not exploration or conquest, but industry. As the ancient texts claim, they came here with a mission to exploit the natural resources of the earth. Initially, they performed the arduous labor themselves, but after millennia of toil, their rank-and-file workers rebelled, refusing to continue. Faced with a crisis that threatened their entire mission, their chief scientist, Enki, proposed a solution. They would create a new being, a primitive worker, to take their place. They did not create this worker from nothing. They engaged in what can only be described as an advanced genetic engineering project. They took the most suitable hominin species already evolving on the planet, perhaps the species we now call Homo erectus, or perhaps one of the ghost ancestors whose genetic signature we are only now detecting, and they upgraded it. They infused it with a measure of their own genetic code, the blood of the gods, to enhance its intelligence and capabilities. The result of this project was the Lulu Amelu, the mixed worker. The result was us, Homo sapiens. This single event, remembered as myth, provides a stunningly coherent explanation for the impossible timeline of Qesem Cave, where modern humans appear hundreds of thousands of years before they should, and for the mysterious ghosts and anomalous genes that haunt our DNA. We were born as a hybrid species, created in their image, but not as their equals, designed to serve. Thus began the first age of humanity, an immense period of time ruled over by these powerful beings. This was the age of the God Kings, the Anunnaki commanders who ruled for periods of time so long that the Sumerian king lists record their reigns in tens of thousands of years. Under their direct guidance, humanity, their new workforce, multiplied and spread across the planet. A global civilization was established, based on the advanced technology of its masters. The great megalithic enigmas of the world are the primary evidence of this age. Baalbek was not a temple foundation, but perhaps a landing platform or a major industrial center. Its 1,000-ton stones moved and lifted with an energy technology we do not possess. Punku was not a ceremonial site, but a manufacturing plant, its andesite blocks cut and shaped with the impossible finesse of machine tools. The purpose of these sites was theirs, not ours. We were merely the labor force that helped to build them. This global infrastructure explains the echoes we hear in every ancient culture. The stories of Viracocha in the Andes and Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerica are not separate myths. They are the regional memories of the same Anunnaki commanders, the same civilizer gods, who were assigned to different parts of the world to manage the human population and oversee their projects. This age may have also seen further biological diversity. Perhaps the giants of myth and legend, the Nephilim of the Bible, were the result of direct breeding between the Anunnaki and their human creations, a hybrid offshoot whose existence became so problematic that their physical remains were, as the conspiracy theories allege, systematically hidden and suppressed by institutions like the Smithsonian in order to protect our simplified and sanitized version of the past. For hundreds of thousands of years, this global, technologically advanced civilization, with humanity at its base and the Anunnaki at its peak, was the status quo on planet Earth. This long, stable era, the first time, was brought to a sudden, brutal, and unimaginably violent end. Approximately 12,800 years ago, a cataclysmic event occurred, an event so devastating that it has been seared into the collective memory of our species. As the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis suggests, our planet was struck by the fragments of a disintegrating comet. The event was one of multiple terrors. There was fire from the sky, igniting the world's forests and darkening the Sunday. There was a sudden and dramatic plunge in global temperatures, an impact winter that would last for more than a millennium. And, most devastatingly, there was water. The impact on the great ice sheets of the north triggered a catastrophic meltwater flood, and the global disruptions created mega tsunamis that washed over the coastlines of the entire world. This was the Great Flood. It was a real physical event, and it was the mechanism that caused the Great Reset. The advanced global civilization of the Anunnaki was almost entirely erased. Their coastal cities were washed away, their infrastructure was shattered, their human workforce was decimated. The Anunnaki themselves, with their advanced astronomical knowledge and spacefaring capability, would have seen the disaster coming. Their departure from Earth, leaving their creation to fend for itself, became the mythological trope of the gods abandoning humanity. The cataclysm was an extinction-level event that drew a line across history, separating the world that was from the world that is. From this ruined, frozen world, the Fourth Age begins. This is our age, the age of the survivors. Small, scattered, and traumatized pockets of humanity emerged from the darkness, having lost nearly everything. Their technology was gone, their knowledge was fragmented, their masters had vanished from the sky. All they had left were their memories. The great civilizer figures who appear at the dawn of our current historical cycle, the Thoths, the Viracochas, the Oannes, may have been the last of the surviving Anunnaki, or perhaps highly knowledgeable human survivors. attempting to reteach the basics of civilization to their shattered descendants. But the full context was lost. The memory of their own genetic creation became the myth of being formed from clay and divine blood. The memory of advanced technology became the stories of the magic of the gods. The memory of the cometary impact became the legend of a great flood sent to punish sinful men. And the memory of their former masters became the pantheons of gods we see in every ancient religion. Our recorded history, which begins so suddenly in Sumer around 6,000 years ago, is not the story of the dawn of man. It is the story of the dawn of our amnesia. It is the story of a traumatized species finally rebuilding itself to the point where it could once again write things down, having almost completely forgotten the epic, world-spanning history that came before. And so, the grand picture is assembled. It is a story, creation, servitude, civilization, cataclysm, and rebirth. It suggests that we are a species with a hidden past and a hybrid origin, living in the faint shadow of a lost golden age, carrying the biological and cultural signature of our creators within us. The evidence we have reviewed, from the stones of Baalbek to the code in our cells, does not prove this story beyond all doubt, but it paints a picture that is, for the first time, vast enough and strange enough to account for all of the impossible, contradictory and miraculous clues that our ancestors left behind. The only question that remains is whether we are finally ready to listen to what this lost history is telling us about our true place in the universe. On that final thought, our long journey for tonight comes to a close. May your rest be deep and your dreams be filled with the echoes of a world that once was. Sleep well.